welcome to the Well Bible Reading Journey podcast. We are in week 67 this week. We're going to be in Judges. We're in Judges 13, 14, and 15. You're also going to read 2 Psalms this week, so don't skip one. We're in Psalms 66 and 67. That's what we're going to be reading this week. And you might notice that our background is different once again. We're at Craig's home again. Thank you for having us.
Anytime.
We're having to meet on a Saturday this week because I'm going to be gone tomorrow. Yep. And so we had to meet on a Saturday, and this was the best option for a Saturday. So thank you so much.
Got to make this happen, but we are flexible and happy to have you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's really nice that I can text you and be like, I can't do Sunday. And then you're like, come on over.
We'll figure it out.
We hope that you enjoyed the stories we've been bringing to you in Judges so far. We've really spent a lot of time digging into these judges who were just seemingly progressively getting a little bit worse and worse. And we're going to continue that story with another judge, Samson.
Yeah. And Samson is an interesting character because it's one we generally think of from our Sunday school days, if we grew up in the church or that you hear about in popular literature, is his story with Delilah, and she cuts his hair.
Yeah.
And we're not even there yet in chapters 13, 14, and 15.
Yeah.
That'll come in 16. But Samson's story as a whole is chapters 12 through 16. And it's fascinating. There's actually more verses. The Bible uses more verses to talk about the life of Samson than any other judge.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. I didn't grow up in church, but I did ask Austin. I said, what do you remember about Samson? And like you said, majority of what he spoke about, pretty much everything except for the fact that he was a Nazarite at birth. Other than that, he basically, the whole story he remembered was just the chapter 16, his death story, which is fascinating to me that there's so much of his life that we just do not focus on. So we get a chance to do that today.
It is. So I wanted to start with kind of an outline of Samson's story and kind of the progression of the scripture through, and I'm going to include chapter 16 in this outline because that is Samson's whole life, even though we'll get to it in detail next week. But a couple points I want to make about Samson. First, his story, and specifically the text in chapters 12 through 16 form a chiasm. And this is found by theologian Davis Dorsey in his book called The Literary Structure of the Old Testament, a commentary from Genesis to Malachi. That's a mouthful, so we'll post a link in the show notes, but it's a very interesting walkthrough that he does on on each Old Testament book to show the literary tools and structures that are used throughout. I hadn't seen it or found it until this week. I found it very helpful. So I'll offer that to you, and just as another tool to help navigate the Bible.
Yeah.
But anyway, specifically what he found in the structure of chapters 12 through 16 is a chiasm with the center beginning of 15 verses 9 through 20 and the story of the Jawbone, where Samson picks up something that's unclean and kills 1,000 Philistines with it in vengeance. But it's fascinating that the lesson of the story, the treasure of the story, which is the center of the chiasm, is that Samson is violating his Nazarite vow, which he'd already done. And a Nazarite, just to help us remember, was somebody who was dedicated to the Lord, usually for a period of time. In chapter 13, where the angel of the Lord came to his parents and God wanted Samson to be set aside as a Nazarite for life.
That's not common at all.
It's not common, but a Nazarite, even for a short period of time of dedication, they were supposed to stay away from fermented drink. They were supposed to stay away from anything unclean, and they were supposed to grow their hair to the Lord because that was a sign of dedication. Right, no razor to the head. And by this time in the story, in chapter 15, with the center of the jawbone, Samson had already been in vineyards, and probably drank at the wedding feast. He had killed a lion and taken honey out of it, so he had touched something unclean. And we'll see in chapter 16, that's where Delilah takes a razor to his head. And so by the time he's done, he's violated all three. And we actually think of his hair, as a side note, as the source of his strength. But I'm finding through the progression of his story that his eyes are his actual weakness because he keeps running after prostitutes.
Yeah.
So all that is kind of part and parcel that he's a microcosm of Israel itself.
Yeah.
everything Israel has done to descend into the pits of idolatry and consort with Canaanite women, or just Canaanites and Canaanite gods. Samson has done, and we see that in his consorting with the Canaanite women. So it's fascinating that God is still using him in this way, even though he and Israel are so unfaithful.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and I love your outline. That's going to be really helpful as we move forward. But your last point stood out to me just now, that just because God is using you, or just because you feel like God is blessing you in some way, doesn't mean you're right with God.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think we need to be really careful. We don't always assume just because God is using that you're right with God. Clearly, Israel and Samson, which is interesting. The reason why he's using Samson, because we're supposed to imagine, out of everybody, this is the best God can do, and even this is really bad.
Yeah.
And so if that's the best God has to use to offer, the rest of Israel is really out of bounds as well. And so, but God still uses him, and that is just incredible to me.
Yeah, and I think of pretty popular, or it's pretty well known that he uses Nebuchadnezzar, for example, to the Babylonian emperor that came in and sent Judah into exile in the 500s BC. So he even uses somebody like Nebuchadnezzar, who is a pagan warlord who didn't know God at all, but he's still going to use who he's going to use to accomplish his purposes.
That's right. So he'll use whatever he can to push things forward. So
speaking of purposes, what is Samson's purpose? We get that from the angel of the Lord talking to his mother, right?
We do. It's really interesting. Chapter 13, as we started out, the very first thing I noticed in verse 1, yet again, even uses the word again. It almost feels like, it feels that way. Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years, period. Yeah. And then we immediately start the Samson story where the angel of the Lord, like you said, comes to his mom first. Yeah. What's missing? I noticed something missing here.
Israel never cried out to God.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're oppressed and they're not crying out to him anymore.
Every story before then, that phrase is there. And then it was the crying out of the people that he decided to bring up a deliverer.
Sometimes it's interesting what is not in the Bible as much as what's in.
Pay attention. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you. And so you're right. God sends an angel of the Lord to this woman. She's left unnamed. And I think we can talk about, I have a reason maybe why later, why she stays unnamed. Because most of the time when a person has this much story, in the story they're named.
Right. His father's named,
exactly.
Manoah.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And so I think there's maybe a reason why she's not named. But the angel of the Lord does come to her. So he comes to this woman and he tells her, hey, I want your son, you're gonna bear a son, to be set apart and act kind of almost like a priest would act, like a high priest.
The Nazarite we just talked
Nazarite,
about.
Yes. And then after he gives him very strict instructions, it finishes with this sentence. And this is the point I think we're supposed to make. This is the purpose of Samson. It says at the end of verse 5, it says, and he, meaning your son that you're about to have, he shall begin, notice the word begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines. That is the purpose. Yeah. So you get the what. I want you to set him apart, right? But the purpose is that.
And
it's important.
Before we move on, I want to give a little bit of a background for the Philistines, since we know that's his purpose.
Like that.
And you've already said that the Philistines have come in and are oppressing Israel. Well, where do they come from? I mean, I don't think we've seen them up to this point in the biblical narrative, and there's actually a reason for that. They are generally. Historians are generally surprised by how quickly they materialize on the historical scene, not just the biblical scene, but in what they find in archaeology and what they find in writings. They're there, but they appear very suddenly. And so the general theory is there's a lot of ancient civilizations, including Egypt, and a lot of them in Canaan, that fell or collapsed or went on a downward spiral in the 1100s BC. Egypt's power starts to decline, and the general reason, or a reason for that, there's several theories posited as to why there was a general decline in that area, but one theory or consequence was these a group of people called Sea Peoples, and they're generally thought to be from Southern Europe, come marauding and raiding and pillaging along the kind of Levant coastline. The Levant is the part of the Mediterranean Sea and that part of Canaan and the Promised Land and Lebanon that we're generally talking about in Israel's land. But the Sea Peoples pillaged all the way down the Mediterranean coastline, all the way into Egypt. And they were very warlike, they were very savage, and they did a lot of destruction. And so the Sea Peoples, if they came down from Southern Europe, they could have been Germanic, they could have been Greek at that time. So we don't really know, but one of those peoples would have been the Philistines. Yeah. And so the Philistines came in and settled kind of in the area southeast of Israel. And we've talked about before how they applied pressure on the tribe of Dan. And we'll see that play out next week too in Judges 18. But they're starting to create a lot of problems for Israel even before Samson's time. But they've come in and really are oppressing very brutally the Israelite people. And you're right, they didn't even cry out for help.
Yeah, they didn't.
How much have they forgotten God?
Right, exactly. What you just said reminded me of the archaeology podcast I listened to.
I was thinking about that this week.
Yeah, that I sent you, and they were like, okay, so we talk about how Israel came in and utterly destroyed these people. It seemed impossible because there's such a small number of people comparatively, and the archaeology showed that at the same time, Pharaoh, whichever Pharaoh was at the time, was like, y'all need to take your best warriors out of this land. Take them, come help me, because we have these sea people who are coming to attack us. I need your help. And it's almost as if they emptied out at the exact same time Israel was coming in. It was like God's way of using these savage sea people to empty the land. So Israel did conquer and did, utterly destroy, but very small amounts of people comparatively before Pharaoh called them out to come help.
And it also explains how they couldn't have exterminated all of the Canaanites.
Yeah, because they came back. You're like, it said you utterly destroyed, but now they're back again. Yeah. How did that happen? Well, it's because they came back after they went and helped.
Totally agree. No, I think there's definitely something there. I don't know that we as an historians, I'm not sure we have a well-constructed timeline.
I love that you just put yourself in a category of a historian. we, as an historian.
Which I'm not.
But you literally categorize yourself as one.
I meant to say we as people. But yeah, we as historians. We don't have a well-constructed timeline on what happened exactly when. So a lot of this is conjecture, but there's a lot of disruption during this period. And people that tell you that the Exodus couldn't have happened absolutely don't know enough to even pretend to make that claim.
Yeah.
And then they want to discount the Bible on top of it, which is probably the best written record of history we have, which is totally ironic.
It really is, actually. Yeah. So what happens after that? So the angel leaves her, and she kind of, it seems so funny to me. It seems so nonchalant. She's like, goes to her husband. She's like, so this guy,
this man,
maybe angelic. He was kind of awesome looking. I'm not really where he was from. I didn't get his name, but he said we're going to have a son, so that's cool.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me is, remember we talked about in the Gideon story when an angel of the Lord appeared to him, he tests him. Are you actually an angel or not? And remember, and we talked about that's from Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18. It says that you're supposed to test anyone any person or any spirit who claims to be of God. And so we thought Gideon, that was a good test, but later we find he gives him tests because now it's God. He's proven himself.
That's a bad test.
That's the bad kind of test. Here we notice that she doesn't test at all. She's kind of like, I don't know, maybe. And so
and that's not even faith. That's almost just apathy.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
But it's her personality, and I think this might be one of the reasons why she becomes very nameless. Because as we keep forward, I think I'll hopefully help point to why. But here she's kind of like, this guy, I don't know where he's from. And then the husband's like, and she tells him what the angel said, but notice what she didn't say. Remember you just said, pay attention to what the Bible doesn't say? She repeats everything that the angel told her except for one thing.
The purpose.
The purpose. She leaves out the purpose. Okay, 5 minutes after the angel leaves, she can't even tell the purpose of why she's supposed to have this son.
It's like Eve when Eve kind of mischaracterized what God had said to Satan. And then when she was talking to Adam too, it was a little bit Just enough different.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It makes a big difference. And so then the husband speaks up, and he's like, well, if an angel of the Lord, you say some kind of God, they keep using the word Elohim here.
Elohim.
And so they don't really know what God. They don't necessarily believe in Yahweh himself. He's like, well, I'm going to pray to this God because I feel, and he asks specifically the angel to come back and tell him the purpose. Why are we having the son? Can you tell me exactly what's happening here?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating to me is the angel responds. God responds.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, God responded to the prayer, and then he sent the angel back to the woman again in the field by herself.
Yeah.
I was like, you respond to the man's prayer, but then the angel shows up to the woman again. It's like he's given her another chance. The woman gets the husband, and the husband's like, okay, tell me what this is about. And the angel goes, I already told the woman. She basically looks at...
She needs to do what I told her.
Yeah, basically the angel looks at the husband, but is basically pointing at her. Woman, I already told you what you should be doing. Do that. Yeah. Obey what I said. And he repeats all of the same thing except for what? He repeats everything but leaves what out?
The purpose.
The purpose again.
Yeah.
The purpose again. I have a theory that the husband and Samson, neither one of them actually know the purpose of what Samson was supposed to do. I don't think it was ever relayed because she already forgot to tell the husband. The angel never gives it again. Why would she tell anyone else?
That was my question when you brought this up, or one of my questions is, why didn't the angel clarify? I mean, God would have known, right?
Yeah, right.
Do you have a thought on that? Or is it just one of those great mysteries that the woman didn't listen, so that's a consequence? Just like Eve didn't listen, so that's a consequence.
That's right. I don't have a theory to the reason why the angel didn't go ahead and clarify, but I think
that shows the importance of listening to God and understanding what He's saying. Right. The word is going to go out and not return empty. But sometimes it's going to not return as God intended if you don't listen and do our part in partnering along with God's will.
Yeah, and I think that's why she remains nameless, because her name being in the Bible for all time is a way of showing someone's testimony, someone's purpose, someone's...
She forgot the word of God, so her name was forgotten.
That's exactly my point.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah. I don't think she did her part.
Wow.
And so as we enter in and we get Samson is born, I don't think we're supposed to imagine that he knows he's supposed to defeat the Philistines. He's hanging out with them. He's not defeating them. He's been hanging out in their towns, enjoying himself.
And by the way, you made an important point in the pre-talk. They name him Samson, which means what?
Samson means like the sun.
Yeah.
Like the sun. Mind you, if I believed Yahweh or the angel of the Lord came to me and wanted me to have a son and name him, I would name him after the very God, right, who just spoke to me, right? Yeah. Listen, the nearest town to where they're from is a big town. I can't pronounce it. I butchered anyways. But the town actually means the house of the sun, and they worship the sun god. They worship the sun god. And so I think that they truly believed, even if there was a glimpse of them in chapter 14, there was like, well, maybe he's going to kill us. And she's like, he's not going to kill us. Even though there was a glimpse of maybe they understood, I don't think they ever did, because she names him exactly to what God she thought came to her and gave her a son, the sun god. That's what I think.
Interesting. Yeah, Samson's Hebrew name is Shimshon, which that's a fun word to say. But yeah, it literally means sun. I read like the sun. I read somebody, Chad Bird. He had a little devotional on Samson. He called him Sunny Boy. That was funny.
The Sunny Boy. We'll call him that.
Yeah, Sunny Boy.
Yeah.
And he was making some of the same points you did. That wasn't necessarily a favorable rendering of the name.
Yeah, I don't think it's supposed to be. I think so. We start chapter 14. Can we move forward?
We can.
We start chapter 14 with Samson went down to Timnah, and he sees this person, sees this daughter of a Philistine. And it almost makes you feel, if you read into the text, it almost makes you feel like he hangs out in Timnah a lot. It isn't like he randomly, it's as if he doesn't know he's supposed to deliver Israel from the Philistines. In fact, he's actually buddying up with the Philistines. He's like hanging out in their towns. He likes the look of, it's almost as if he's been seeing her for a while and kind of has the eyes for her. Remember you said his eyes is his weakness. We're going to see that.
Chasing the woman with his eyes. But the eyes, it's ironic. His eyes were supposed to allow him to see, but he doesn't see. Yeah. And we see that theme all through Samson's story.
we get to verse 4, and Craig, if I'm being honest with you, I spent an entire day
Really?
pondering verse 4.
Wow.
It
Later, let's read it real quick.
Yeah. Start in verse 3 because it would make context.
Okay. This is verse 3 of chapter 14. Mm-hmm. But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel.
Okay. So many thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
first, I could not move past this spot. I was stuck here for a long, long time. Wow. And I pondered and I would think about it, and I'd go on with my day and do things with my kids, and it would hit me again, and I'd ponder it some more. So after months wrestling, I think I have something going on here.
Okay. Let's give it to us.
So the first thing is it dawned on me that in verse 3, when it says right in my eyes, I instantly thought, ooh, every time I've heard that, in all of our conversations, Craig, every time we've heard that phrase or a phrase similar, it was always negative.
Yeah.
You're supposed to think, oh, that's Eve taking what she thought was desirable in her own eyes, and so on and so forth. We've been tracking this pattern for a year now, literally over a year.
Well, since Genesis.
Since Genesis, we've been talking about this pattern of when anytime it says something that someone thinks what's right in their own eyes, you're supposed to imagine, but they're not looking through God's eyes. And so I instantly thought, ooh, this is not going to be good. But then the next verse says, but his father and mother did not know that this was God's intention. And I was like, wait, so now this is good? Like, how was the thing that he's supposed to see in his own eyes now? The pattern is that God wanted that. So that stumped me at first. And then I thought the phrase "in opportune time" sounded very similar to, I know it's in Greek, very similar to when we talk about how the enemy in the Luke's gospel, when he tempts Jesus in the wilderness, at the very end, he says he's going to come back in opportune time. And then we found out at the end of Luke, when the devil goes into Judas leaves, and he says he's going to wait to find an opportune time. And it's connecting these 2 points here. I was like, so now you're telling me that it's a very similar phrase where God's going to use this opportune time. God doesn't need an opportune time. He creates his own opportunities all the time. He could just create whatever he wants. So how is he using this very thing? Isn't God the one whose law says you cannot intermarry, and yet God's saying this is okay? I was so worked up about this. What do you mean? What do you mean, God, this is his plan? Doesn't he condemn the fact that you should not intermarry to the fact of death? There's consequences of death involved.
That's all throughout Deuteronomy and Numbers.
Yeah. So this one verse threw all these wrenches in my brain.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that verse doesn't make sense. Why is God saying it's okay for him to intermarry? And then why does he use this whole opportune time thing? And I could not move past it. Yeah. So let me see if I can digest it just a hair. I think you're going to find out as we move further that, number one, God is not condoning this intermarriage, but he's going to use it. And not only is he going to use it to fulfill Samson's purpose that Samson doesn't even know about, but he actually never marries her anyways. Yeah. And I think that takes a little bit of leading into, but we'll get there. So number one, I think he's using it, not accepting it, and he doesn't marry her anyway. So it's like he knows Samson's going to explode and blow up like a little toddler, tantrum toddler. He's a little tantrum
seems to be
guy.
his pattern.
I know, over and over again. So that's number one. Number two, the opportune time actually is better described as looking to stir up trouble among. That's the correct translation, or you have to look it up better. He's looking to stir up trouble. So what he's doing is he's using the very thing that Samson, when he uses people, humans, he tends to use humans based on the things that they're already drawn to. Yeah. We already know he's drawn to this woman because it is wrong. His eyes are for the wrong thing. Right. His eyes are for the Philistine. But God tends to use us anyways, despite what our desires, our heart desires.
It's like when God sent the evil spirit, was it among Abimelech and Shechem, to stir up trouble among them, because they were both in the wrong. So God was using that to accelerate.
Exactly the same phrasing here. Yeah. Same phrasing here, which helped me a ton. So it's what I imagined all of a sudden was not that the right in his eyes was now positive. It's still negative, but what he's saying is God is going to use the very thing that Samson's weakness, right? And he's going to use it as his strength to fulfill his purpose anyways, which is fascinating.
That is.
Yeah. It took me, I don't know if I did it justice, but it took me a lot of mulling over these thoughts.
Makes a lot of sense. I think it's one of those, when we struggle with a part of Scripture and it makes us ask questions, that's where a gold mine of treasure is meant to be. And digging in is what we should do.
We should.
Good. I'm really glad you did that. That's helpful.
Awesome. Good. Okay, so let's keep moving, trekking forward into this marriage. This marriage that's going to happen. This marriage that doesn't actually
becomes not a marriage.
Not a marriage.
Even though it says Samson's marriage in my ESV subtitle for chapter 14, but he goes in and what's up with this riddle? I mean, why do we have to have riddles? And why does he kill a lion? I mean, he's like all over the place.
I know, this is a crazy story. It's a crazy story. So you see the Spirit of the Lord rushing upon him a couple times here.
Which, that's interesting.
Yeah, we had a side thought conversation on this.
We did. So with Gideon, the Holy Spirit clothed.
We made a point to talk about he clothed.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So God clothed Gideon with his Holy Spirit.
And we use that as we talk about the Super Mario Brothers star.
Yes.
Because this is a Super Mario Brothers star moment.
Yep.
And it used the word specifically clothed.
Gives him power.
And he feels this power and he's supposed to go and do something with it. And he doesn't.
And also think of back in our Genesis days, we were talking about when somebody got new clothes or they were reclothed, it was synonymous with a change of identity. Mm-hmm. You can especially see that in the Joseph story as he changes back and forth with clothing. So go back and read that if you're interested, but we talked about it. But so I think the important point for the Holy Spirit clothing Gideon was that Gideon had a change of character.
Yeah.
And he became a man of God because God was within him. But as we go and the judges get worse and worse, the clothing language goes away, doesn't it?
Yeah, in the Jephthah story, it said that he rested. The Holy Spirit rested upon Jephthah. And I made a point, you and I talked about it, like that's a weird shift in language, but we didn't really understand why quite yet. And then here, it literally uses the word rushed upon him every single time. And so you and I were talking about this a minute ago, and this is completely speculating. Yeah. And this is just us having conversation. But we were thinking, okay, with Gideon, he was bad, but not as bad as what we're seeing now. And so the Holy Spirit wanted to clothe and stay a while, be in him, use him and there was hope involved. And then the next story, it's all right, they're getting worse. They don't understand me even more. They're so far from me that I'm just going to rest upon them to accomplish my task, but I don't want to stay there long. You called it an overnight stay.
Yeah. It's like he was at home with Gideon. Now he's just staying overnight at a hotel.
Yeah, with Jephthah here. And then here, it's gotten so bad with Samson, it's almost, you get this feel like it kind of rushes in, does its business, and rushes out. It doesn't want to be near all of this unholiness.
He's going to stay as short amount of time as he needs to get his purposes accomplished, but then he's going to leave as quickly as he can. He just can't stay around that much. The stench of sin, right? The taint of it. He can't tolerate it.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much the ground is crying out during this section of Judges.
It's not getting rest anymore. We haven't seen that language in a while.
We don't really know, but we notice that there's a change in language. So the Holy Spirit's doing the same action. Yep. The Super Mario Brothers star is in every story, but it's coming upon them in very different ways. Yeah. I will say I was impressed with Samson. The Super Mario star hits him and he reacts. He
does go. He's a man of action.
He's a man of action. He does it immediately. He immediately acts. The first time the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, he immediately tears this lion as if it was a young goat. First of all, am I supposed to know what it means? How hard it is to tear open a young goat? Is there young goat ripping contests that I don't know about happening during this time?
I think we should find one.
What's happening? I was thinking, this is a weird phrase. How am I supposed to imagine that it's... Anyways, I think I just laughed when I read that. Yeah. I was like, what does that even mean? But that's the first thing we see.
And then the fact that's in here that he kills the lion as one tears open a young goat, the fact that that's there is odd enough. But then it comes back later in this chapter. He sees the dead carcass later, so that's where he violates his second Nazirite vow. Yeah. Scoops some honey out of the carcass, so he's touching an unclean thing. I guess he lathers up the honey and then takes some to his Timnah fiance.
He takes this to his parents.
Oh, parents, that's right.
He takes this to his parents and asks his parents to eat it. So basically what you're supposed to imagine here is not only is he undoing his own vow and making himself unclean, and technically, when you don't follow a Nazirite vow, you fail to do it. You have to go to the temple. You have to shave your head. You have to make all these sacrifices. And you have to start over. He doesn't do this. Now, not only that, but now he takes something unclean to his parents. Now his parents are unclean. So if his parents happen to want to go to the temple in the next week and do a sacrifice for some reason, they would be directly sinning. Yeah. Directly sinning, unknowingly, because he did this without telling them.
Wow.
Also, can we just pay attention to the fact that he's with his parents, but then all of a sudden he's in the vineyard by himself without his parents, and then he meets his parents. Why did he separate from his parents anyways? Yeah. I don't, and also you're supposed to imagine.
I think he's hiding something from them.
Clearly, he's hiding something, right? Like, he's with them, we're heading down to Timnah to get married.
Oh, let me go to the vineyard.
And then I'm going to go this way, and then I'll meet you later and give you some honey. It's a weird story. And then he gets very angry to the point where he goes and kills a whole bunch of Philistines, Canaanite people, and then he brings them back and gives them the linen that he owes them. And then it says in verse 19 that because he was so hot in anger, he went back to his father's house. Notice, he went back to his father's house. What did he not do? At the end of a 7-day wedding feast, which is a wedding, they did all 7 days, so they're close to the end of the wedding. Yeah. But there's one more thing that's required of them for it to be a final wedding.
Finish the vows.
Finish the vows, which is what, Craig? Don't be awkward about it. They need to consummate the marriage. You can't be awkward.
I can't say that on public TV.
It's in the Bible.
I know.
They never
being coy.
They never consummated the marriage. Yeah. So therefore, technically, they are never married.
And so much so that the Timnah fiance, I'm just going to call her that, her father in early verses of chapter 15 gives her to the best man.
Yeah, he gives her to the best man.
Samson comes back to claim her. Father-in-law is like, well, sorry, I've already given her away because you disappeared.
Because you had a hot temper and you threw a big fit and left. Yeah. And now you come back and expect me to bring her to your chambers? Sorry. Yeah. Yep. She's been given to someone else.
That ship has sailed.
And so then he does something really crazy. He does something, once again, I keep calling it a toddler, because what he does next, I can only imagine the creativity of a toddler coming up with something such a crazy thing. He traps 300 foxes. I can't even imagine myself catching one fox, let alone 300 of them.
That's a lot of foxes.
And then having the creativity to tie them in pairs. Because that's timely.
Set their tail on fire.
Right? Separate them in pairs first. Yeah. And then somehow light them at the same, I don't know if he's running with this torch to light them all individually. And then they do what? The foxes do what?
They scatter into the grain fields.
And destroy everything. Yeah. Destroy everything.
Destroy all the crops.
What's interesting about this section right here is this is a direct attack to one of the Philistine gods, Dagon. Dagon is the god of the wheat or god of the fields.
I've read he's god of crop fertility in general as well.
Yeah, crop fertility. So the fields. The fields is just it's the Texan way of saying it. I don't know.
I should know that since I'm Texan.
Right? Anyways, it's a direct attack. And I made a point to think to myself, ooh, it's a direct attack to one of the gods. Is this kind of like when Moses and Pharaoh and the striking of the plagues? Yes. And we made a point to make it really clear that each plague had a direct attack to one of their gods. Yep. So not only is God defeating the enemy that's oppressing his people, but he's also directly attacking their gods, because he is ultimately what he needs to be known as, the God. Yep. And you see this here as a direct attack, and then later we're going to see the same Dagon temple show up in chapter 16, which is next week. Yep. No. And
we'll see what Samson does there, but you're right. God is using Samson, as imperfect as he is, and as unaware of God's presence and his purpose that Samson is, God is still going to use him and defeat the local god of the people who are oppressing Israel. Yeah. It's totally fascinating.
It's so fascinating. Have you ever heard the Samson story as yet God defeating defeating other gods?
No.
As one of the points of the story.
And honestly, I hadn't heard the plague story with Egypt described in that that way much.
Oh, okay,
Maybe
gotcha.
a few times, but
Yeah,
not much.
yeah.
Much less Samson. Never.
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
So I think as we imagine God fulfilling his purpose and getting Israel and his people into the promised land, we're supposed to also imagine throughout all the story, because I went back and we thought about it. Gideon was a direct attack to the god Baal.
Yep.
And then Jephthah, I don't know for sure, but I would assume that there's some kind of god being defeated there in that story.
Well, Jephthah makes his vow to sacrifice whatever comes across his threshold first after he returns from victory. And that we talked last week, that ends up being his daughter.
Yes.
And that was against the Ammonites. And the god of the Ammonites was Moloch.
And Moloch requires
child sacrifice.
So
there you go.
We talked about this earlier. I really do think that throughout each of these stories, we probably can pinpoint not only where he's fulfilling his purpose of Israel coming into the land, but he's also elevating himself above all other gods that they're worshiping.
Yes.
And it's missed. I don't think it's ever talked about in the Judges. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we end chapter 15 with the story about the Jawbone.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
I think we should end. I think we should wrap up today's conversation with the very center of your chiasm.
Yes.
I think that's a very fitting way of ending today's conversation.
Agreed.
Right here in this chiasm.
So after the fields are set on fire, the Philistines come up to who would have been his father-in-law and his Timnah fiance, and they threaten to set them on fire and do set them on fire.
Yeah. Right? So what's happening is they get angry about it, and they go, who's responsible? And someone tells them, oh, it's Samson, because the father-in-law gave his wife to somebody else, and Samson went on this rampage. And so they went and torched and killed them. That is absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah, that's very brutal.
That's
very brutal.
Very much we're supposed to imagine this is what Canaanite living is like.
Yep.
This is so brutal.
That's why they had to be judged. That's why the time was right for them to be judged by God.
Yeah.
And so coming in response, Samson then picks up a jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 Philistines.
Yes, he does.
And so he picks up this unclean thing.
Yeah.
Again, an unclean thing, and kills 1,000 Philistines. And this cycle of revenge continues, because we'll see it play out in chapter 16 that the Philistines will respond in turn. And so we won't go into 16 in detail here, but this, Samson, he just continues this cycle of revenge, and he has to one up the Philistines, who then have to one up him, and it just continues to spiral until everybody's wiped out. And so at one point, in our own story, somebody's got to drop the jawbone, and I heard Rob Bell give this teaching. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I don't agree with a lot of what Rob Bell says, but this is a brilliant point. Somebody's got to drop the jawbone, and ultimately Jesus is the one that drops the jawbone in human history.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
It's really interesting.
That's interesting. I wrote down the note that it's interesting that he is used by God using an item that disqualifies him to be used by God.
Even God will even use those things.
Yeah, which is fascinating. And then at the end of this jawbone story, it's miraculous. He feels the power rush on him again. He responds to it. He uses that power, that feeling. He moves forward, and then he names this place. Right? He names this place.
He names it Ramoth Lehi.
Yeah,
in verse 17.
Which means what?
Which means, in my footnote of ESV footnote, it says it means the hill of the jawbone.
So, the audacity, first of all, I just can't even fathom this. It's the only time an Israelite names something after themselves and not God after a miracle.
Yeah.
The only time. Even an Egyptian Hagar is smart enough to name the place that God came and saw her. Yeah. And named her the place God sees. Elroy.
Yep.
God sees.
That's amazing.
And so even an Egyptian understands enough that when you are given a blessing or a miracle and you see this thing happen upon his own, obviously this is not his own doing. And to name it after himself and what he did is just absolutely crazy.
You honor the one that you name it after the one that made it possible in honor of the source of the power. Samson obviously thinks he's the one that made it possible. He's the source of his own power. That's that's how I read that anyway.
Yeah, I think it's exactly. He doesn't even understand it. He doesn't even understand it. I think at some point in chapter 16, you might see him kind of turn and be like, oh, but as of right now, he doesn't.
We'll get there.
And we end chapter 15 with a really familiar phrase that we've seen in all the judges' stories. Verse 20 says, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. That's a phrase we've heard a lot.
Yeah.
But
after each judge's story was done, that's the way the biblical author would say that, okay,
and then he died.
This is what this judge did. He died. Now we'll move on.
Yes, every single time. The same phrase existed, but it always says, the end, he died, move on.
Right.
We don't get the end, he died.
We get another chapter of Samson's story.
And this is the chapter that everyone seems to remember.
Right.
And so it dawned on me this week. I said, it's fascinating that the narrator leaves this open for you intentionally, saying this should be the end of the story. But yet, I'm going to focus more on Samson's death than I did his life. And we remember his death more than we do his life. Yep. No other judge has that.
That's true.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And it's interesting that this is for the last judge that's at the pit, so to speak, of the depression or the descent to which Israel has fallen.
Yeah. It's almost like you get like a bonus episode. And like in today's language, you're like, this should be the end, period. But bonus episode next week, we get to learn about how that ended.
Yep.
To end by saying this, as you read this week and as you move forward in these stories, I hope that God will speak to you on what is not said. And what is missing, and that those things would really stand out to you. Like, oh, I feel like something's missing here. And that you'd pay attention to those things this week. And with that said, we can't wait to see you next week.
Have a great week, y'all.
Bye.